Okay, up next we have Jim Kuipers. He'll be discussing the Stillwater Mining Company and the Good Neighbor Agreement, a model for stakeholder engagement in tailings storage facilities. Jim is a mining environmental consultant and the principal and consulting engineer with Kuipers and Associates based in Wisdom, Montana. He received a BS from Montana College of Mineral Science and Technology in mineral process engineering and is a registered professional engineer in Colorado and Montana. He grew up in a mining family and has worked on mining and environmental projects, including project development, engineering design, tailings storage and other waste facilities, permitting, operations, reclamation and closure, water treatment, and financial assurance for over 40 years. Since 1996, his primary work has been as a consultant providing engineering and other technical expertise to governmental and non-governmental organizations relative to hard rock mining and other extractive resource environmental issues. Please welcome Jim.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. One thing I'd wanted to mention is over the last 25 years, I've had an opportunity to speak at other mine design, operation, and closure conferences, and I've always appreciated the organizing committee's willingness to listen to a different perspective. Having spent the last 25, 26 years working kind of on the other side of the fence in some ways, providing technical services to environmental groups, conservation groups, tribes, and others, it's been an interesting experience over the last 25 years, to say the least, I'll tell you. So what I want to talk about today is actually my favorite project, the Good Neighbor Agreement with Stillwater Mining Company. It's something that's been around for quite a while. Want to give you a little bit of information on Stillwater Mining and the Good Neighbor Agreement, talk specifically to how the Good Neighbor Agreement applies to tailings storage facilities at the mine site and what we've been doing there for the past 20 years. Talk a bit about the GNA implementation and what it means, the kind of things that we've been involved in, what's happened over the years, and then really end with some conclusions and some thoughts in terms of what this has meant over the past years. Now, Kurt and David gave a very good presentation this morning on the mine site, on the history. I'm not going to go into that in great detail. I will mention one thing I've always found very interesting is I grew up with an understanding that the Stillwater complex was a piece of South Africa that somehow floated, if you will, up to North America. And I think the more recent understanding that, no, this is really a separate occurrence. Yes, it's old age rock. It has some of the same characteristics, but it's not part of South Africa. It's a different occurrence. We know that because the palladium and platinum ratios are so different, as well as some other things. This is not a new operation. The mines have been around for quite a while. There were actually prior chrome mines located at the Stillwater complex. The mines themselves here have been looking at and operating since 1986, the Stillwater mine in particular. One of the more interesting things that happens here is we have a base metals refinery. And when you look at the world, one of the big issues right now when we talk about decarbonization and green energy minerals, et cetera, is we have a lot of mines in the U.S. We don't have the next stages in terms of smelting, refining, downstream processing. That's something that Stillwater has, at least in part, and I think it's part of what makes the operations quite viable. They do a lot of recycling, by the way, and I think that's something that a lot of folks aren't aware of. The mine is owned by Sibanye-Stillwater, and an interesting part of the agreement is how it's succeeded through all the different companies that have owned the Stillwater mines over the years. You've seen this map before, so you know where we're at. You saw the earlier pictures, and I would just emphasize this is a spectacular area in terms of scenery, wildlife resources, various other things. It's also a very challenging operating environment. I doubt there are many more challenging operating environments in the continental U.S. at least. Certainly elsewhere there are. But in terms of rain, the snow, the wind in particular, all kinds of other things, there are always challenges at these sites. But it's a beautiful area as well. Now, when you look, you see some of the aerial pictures. We talked about the fact that we have mountains on both sides. We have a river running right in between the Stillwater mine site. The same situation actually will exist at the East Boulder mine site in the future as the mine expands, where the operations actually will take place on both sides of the river. This is the Hertzler Tailing Storage Facility. It's the primary current active tailing storage facility for the Stillwater mine. And this is a storage facility that will fill up in the next 5 to 6 years. And at that point, the company will be transitioning to new tailings impoundments. And this is something that when we put together the Good Neighbor Agreement in 2000, 1999-2000, we contemplated that there would be future expansions. The councils agreed to work with the company on those expansions. And so this is the kind of thing that we've been talking about for 7 years now in terms of this stage 4 TSF expansion on the left. And then if the mining company were to continue 15, 20 years from now, we have a stage 5 expansion. So what we're looking at here is 30 years planning in the future. And it's that kind of long-term planning as part of what the Good Neighbor Agreement has encouraged the company to do, and the company itself has taken that on. This is a picture of the East Boulder mine, the sister mine to the Stillwater mine, if you will. And again, a very challenging location, very spectacular scenery. When you look from the aerial view, you can see that it's a fairly compact site, but you've also got the river that goes by it. So again, a lot of different features at the mine site. And then this is the expansion, and I'm going to come back to the Lewis Gold Tailings Storage Facility expansion, but you can see it's an addition to the existing facility. There were a lot of different aspects of looking at different sites and various other things. Interestingly, it came back to expanding the existing footprints rather than going and looking at new locations. So a bit about the Good Neighbor Agreement, and it's kind of an interesting situation. The councils who I work for, they emphasize that this agreement did not occur because we were all getting along. It started with litigation, and we've all heard about, gone through litigation, know what it involves. There was a real flavor, if you will, at this particular site that that's where things were headed. In the 1980s and continuing into the 1990s. Essentially what happened was there was a informal meeting between the Cottonwood Resource Councils, who is one of the organizations in the, on the council side of the Good Neighbor Agreement, and Stillwater Mining Company, and this was in late 1997. Not many of you here probably know Bruce Gilbert. I know a few of you do remember Bruce Gilbert. But he and I basically went to this meeting, myself representing the councils, he representing the company, and we commenced to beat on each other. And I saw the film this morning of the John Wayne and everything else. Well, we kind of did our own version of the same thing, and he yelled at me and I yelled at him. The fortunate thing that happened was Paul Hawks with Cottonwood Resource Council, Bill Nettles, the chairman of Stillwater Mining Company, I guess they kind of said they'd had enough. They went over in the corner of the room, and not sure who said it first, but they asked each other, can we do something different? And I think that was very provocative for the two of them to actually sit and ask that question. But they didn't just stop there, and that's what I think is important. What we did coming out of that was spend about a year, the parties talking about how would we set up a discussion, how would we set up an agreement. And I'd say there were two things that a lot of folks aren't aware that happened. With the environmental groups that I was working with, Cottonwood Resource Council, Stillwater Protective Association, and Northern Plains Resource Council. Number one, they got a professional trainer in for negotiations. I don't know who came up with the $10,000, whose genius this was, but usually environmental groups, tribes, others, they feel at a disadvantage. They don't come in with a point of strength of really understanding how to negotiate, if you will. They're afraid to do it. Well, this was the best $10,000 I've ever seen spent. The guy came in and spent one day. He had a little game that he started all my good environmental friends with, had them blow each other up with nuclear bombs. Real interesting exercise, and it showed the need to compromise, to step back and do something different. So that was one real key. The other key was we did a cash flow analysis. I was tasked to go back and figure out how much money could we cost the company if we sue them. Maximum effort, we'll hire all the best lawyers, we'll shut them down. Well, it cost the company. But then the flip side was, instead of hiring lawyers, costing people lost wages, other things, can we go ahead and put that into the ground? Can we ask the company to do various things to improve the environment, to address citizen issues like traffic, various other things? And when you did the cash flow analysis, just as an example, $20 million might have been the damage that we could do to the company. But when you actually look at what $20 million can buy you on the ground in terms of goodwill, things that you do, et cetera, the simple math was about $1 million a year you could spend. Well, we negotiated and came back and ultimately ended up with an agreement. Might mention it took 2 years to negotiate, and we had at least one occasion where we said, it's not going to work. The issue was over confidential information. And we actually ended up signing confidentiality agreements that allowed the technical advisors to actually get inside the tent to share confidential information. We cannot disclose that information to our clients, but we can use that information to make sure they're confident with what the company's doing. So that's kind of the background of what happened. The agreement, you can go to the Northern Plains website. It's legally binding. I think that's one of the key aspects of it. This is not a memorandum of understanding. It's not a agreement to agree. It's an actual legally binding agreement. The whole process is based upon science-based decision-making. And a key part of what we do is spend a huge amount of time with the councils. These are lay people. These folks come from all ways of life, but they actually allow us to spend the time and educate them, make sure they understand things, and they represent themselves rather than us representing them. Ideally, at least, that's what we try to do here. There's third-party technical consultants like myself. There's a dispute resolution process. If everything falls apart, we can't agree, we've got a process. This agreement has been around for 23 years now. We've never once used that dispute resolution process. We get close, we have some meetings with the CEO and the board, but we've never had to use it. A lot of access to information, in fact, an incredible amount of information that the company provides, the council's review we work with, and it's binding to SMC and all successors. The agreement goes with the property, not with the mining company, et cetera. So no matter who buys the mine, the agreement continues on. Let's see, next slide. If I can figure out how to do that. So just a couple of highlights here. This is a gentleman in the room, Matt Wolf, who you might recognize, and then Paul Hawks, the chairman of CRC. And Paul's feeling about this is we'll have a mine, but we're going to try to make it the best mine we can. And none of us claim that this is the best mine, but what we do claim is we're trying to work that way all the time, and we never quit. So there's all kinds of details in the actual agreement in terms of the objectives, various other aspects of the agreement. The keys are open lines of communication, and I might emphasize that participation in the agreement, it's capitalized, participate. This isn't consultation, it isn't getting together, have a discussion. The councils actually try to and are given an opportunity to influence the company's decisions. And that makes a real difference in terms of feeling like they've been heard, getting the sense that their concerns have been addressed, even if they don't, at the end of the day, we don't agree on everything. Another key aspect is economically feasible, is built into this agreement. We're not going to ask the company to do something that's going to kill the business. That's a big part of the Good Neighbor Agreement, is to respect the company's need to make a profit. We want them to do things better within that realm, but we don't want to put them out of business. And that, I think, is a very key part. A lot of minimizing and maximizing. Minimizing tailings, maximizing use of area, various other aspects. All the different folks from Stillwater Mining Company hear these mantras every time we meet, and it's just part of what we all try to work to do. So when we go to 2001, the agreement was signed in May of 2000, so we're looking at 23 years now that it's gone on. But it was interesting how the agreement actually has a lot about tailings storage facilities, even though in the year 2000, I'm not going to say a lot of us had a lot to think about and do with those. But there was some of you might remember the Rock Creek project came up with the idea of paste tailings. And I think actually Steve Vick might have been the one to originally propose that, a geotechnical engineer that's well known. But Rock Creek, the idea came about of paste tailings being more stable, less area occupied, various other advantages. So we started in 2001 with a study at Stillwater to look at paste tailings, filter tailings, various other things. And at the end of the day, the conclusion was that those tailings methods through 2005 really didn't offer a great deal of advantage. They were more expensive. We could create some additional storage. We really weren't looking at the existing situation as unsafe, and we didn't view the need to go to paste or filter to create the safe tailings. So I would tell you that things went along pretty smoothly from 2001 to 2014. The engineer of record and IPSL did their job. To the extent there was an independent review, I was kind of it. And I think we were all pretty comfortable until the day Mount Poly happened. And I was sitting in Cuesta, New Mexico, working with a group of geotechnical engineers. Richard Dawson, who I mentioned here, was one of them. And I remember we got the news, we looked at some clips. Richard was from Vancouver, Canada, working in Canada, knew about Mount Poly. And what Richard said that I think was very provocative is that essentially once this happened, everything we'd assumed was gone. And what he was talking about was for 20 years in the US and Canada, the assumption was made that because of the regulatory process we had, because of the engineering process we had, because we were all such good operators, this couldn't happen. Not in our area. It might happen in South America, Africa, some other place, but this wasn't going to happen in North America. Well, it did. And it basically disproved all the things that people assumed made these tailings storage facilities infinitely safe. And we all know that since then, we've had some even more spectacular catastrophes resulting in loss of life. So that's changed what we did there and what Stillwater did. Now, in 2015, right after Mount Poly, the company decided to do a bunch of different work in terms of the expansions. And they've been working on those expansion processes and permitting since then. But the first thing we did with the councils was site selection. And this was a very important process of where we opened up the table, said all the different places we could expand tailings, what is your preference? And this is a process that I would do any time with any of the clients I could on the public interest side, because they have a great deal of interest in where things are at. And if they can be part of that process of selecting and being able to say, yes, I agree with that choice, very important part. And so we spent really the first year or two going through site selection, also talking about methods, slurry tailings versus paste tailings versus filter tailings. Stillwater Mining Company has very, very fine tailings because they use sand backfill. It therefore makes it very difficult to filter the tailings. This was something that we took some time, educated people on, and we all came to, I think, a pretty good understanding that we could safely put in place slurry tailings, but particularly with all the different measures that were being taken. The selection, a corporate push for expedited permitting, I need to mention that because this was a good example where I think really the staff, the Good Neighbor Agreement folks were all working together. But the corporate side wanted to sell the company. And they wanted to sell the company now. They wanted to say it could be expansion, double production in 3 years, all sorts of good stuff that they were selling out there. Internally, we knew that there was no way they could permit one tailings impoundment in 18 months and the other 9 months later. Just not realistic, not possible, and not advisable. So we got into a meeting with the company, one of our times where we met with the chief executive, and we basically pushed back. And I think I can dare say that the staff similarly felt we were going too fast, but it was need to push back on the corporate sale, and it worked. Now, the most important thing, in my opinion, that Montana did in their legislation, and by the way, Montana passed tailings legislation in the same period, that we were pushing the company to do what the Mount Poly panel recommended. They also passed legislation requiring an independent review panel. Now, for 15 years, I spent time trying to convince the company, their consultants, like Peasold, others, that we needed to do more site characterization. But I didn't have a convincing argument when I look back, and I know that now. But the independent review panel, made up of two experts in geotechnical engineering and one in geological, they did have not only that authority, but they knew how to do it. They were able to pinpoint where we should look, how we should look. And so a big part of what happened was additional site characterization. We spent an extra 2 years, millions of dollars extra at both sites in order to get site characterization done right. But that's a real plus. That's what you want to do. Peter's going to talk about financial assurance for long-term monitoring and maintenance. I can tell you that's been a big issue with the councils. They want to make sure when Stillwater Mining Company is gone, whenever that may be in the future, that we take care of things, we have the money there to take care of the mine. And then a few of the things we've done, one of the things that I'm most impressed with is the automated instrumentation and monitoring they put in on the site. Essentially, we've got our piezometers, inclinometers, survey monuments all hooked up to satellites. They're reading that information instantaneously, and the company's able to use that to set up an alarm system. And then that's just showing how it's set up. So just a couple other things. One of the things the company's done that I'm very proud of them for doing and appreciate the effort they've made is putting together an emergency preparedness plan. If in the event, the very highly unlikely event, I might add, the tailings start to fail or an issue starts to happen, they've got a plan in place to deal with that. And they were one of the first companies to put together a real good plan. I think I use that plan as an example in many other places. The councils really pushed hard on, we want this plan to be presented to the community. We want the community to be informed, make sure they know they've got a tailings storage facility. So we got them to put together this flyer, and we also got them to put a presentation out to the community. And this is an example of you never know what you're going to get. So getting to the end here, sometimes when you do the right thing, unintended consequences occur. The company put out its tailings community information. They gave a presentation, sent out other information. And wouldn't you know it, that it turned out that a couple of well-off landowners had moved in, and they somehow had built their houses next to the river and not known there was a mine upstream, and apparently not figured out there was a tailings storage facility there. And unfortunately, this has been my experience all too often, is suddenly a couple of rich folks who weren't involved, who could have been involved in a process, who would have been helpful in the whole process, they get mad, they give some money to the environmental community, and the next thing you know, you got people opposing instead of working with the situation. I can tell you the councils have not changed their position. They still support this, I still support it, but it has been interesting seeing other people not so involved, not as well informed, show up and make the issues they have. Just a couple of other things. The 2022 flooding you saw, that's a good example where the company did things right. The company set things up, they reacted well. This is the kind of thing I expect Stillwater Mining Company to be able to deal with, is a flood event, is unexpected things. The key to me has been the legally binding nature of the GNA. Without it being legally binding, I just think there'd be too much wiggle. We don't have the objectives, all the other things that have made this work. The volunteer time of the councils I work with, that's something I can't underestimate. The people who are volunteering for the councils, they're putting in 20 hours a month. It's not unusual, 40 hours a month, volunteer time. This is 6 to 8 people, and they spend time with folks like me where I try to teach them, try to educate them about all these different things. The company people, they don't meet with the councils once. They meet with the councils 3 times every time we talk about things. Amy, sometimes she's meeting with them 4 times, okay? What I appreciate, and it's really last, is the company's commitment and patience to making this work, to meeting with the councils, spending the time, providing the data. That's, these 3 things here are really what causes this agreement to work, why it's succeeded all these years. And so I think I really would want to commend and appreciate the effort that the company people, many of whom are in the room, have made to make this successful. Some of them, like Matt and Randy, 20 years plus, they've been doing this. And so big part of our success. Just would kind of close with the idea that one of the things that the mining industry, and Randy Weimer mentioned this, the mining industry doesn't like to be the first to do anything. Nobody in the mining industry wants to be the first to step into something new or different. Well, SMC did, and I think what I'd encourage everybody does, just give it a try. Do something different. Don't take the same approach. We know it's not working. Go ahead and think about something different like the Good Neighbor Agreement, other approaches to try to meet people, get them involved, something different than this clashing that we all seem to be heading towards, even more so today than in the past. So appreciate the chance to talk about the Good Neighbor Agreement, and appreciate the chance to work with Stillwater Mine Company and everybody on it over the last 25 years. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. That was a great talk. I wonder if you'd offer an opinion as to why there aren't more good neighbor agreements in the U.S. or elsewhere. What's the resistance? Is it a part of the mining companies or the environmental groups or both? Or what do you say about that?
No, Mike, thanks for asking that question, because I think it's an important question. And I actually was talking with some folks earlier about this today. If any of you have a chance, read Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, chapter 16. And there's in that book a conversation between him and a mining industry person. And that mining industry person happens to be myself. But the conversation was this, that when we actually looked at the capacity of reaching agreements like the Good Neighbor Agreement, we recognize this industry has that capacity. They have the funds, they can hire the consultants, they have people who you can say, your job is to go see if you can make this work. The environmental community does not have that same mandate or capacity. Number one, their funding, very rarely if ever, and I think this is incredibly unfortunate, it's not to work out solutions, it's to oppose a project. Their mentality, their culture. It's not one of, again, sitting down and working constructively. It's one of opposition. And so when I really look at the biggest obstacle to the Good Neighbor Agreement, the reason there haven't been 20 more, because I've tried, okay, to create the same thing again and again, is really the willingness of the environmental and conservation community, that group of people to come to the table and work. Again, what I would emphasize is it's oftentimes a lack of resources, a lack of confidence to do that. So I think one of the things that I look to try to do in the work I'm trying to undertake is what can I do and what can we collectively do so that they feel more comfortable, more confident to sit at the table and to reach compromise and to come up with some reasonable way of us all working together. So that's one thought I have. I think it's a lot more complex than that. But certainly, that's part of the issue.
Any other questions?
Thanks again.
All right, thanks, Jim.